The gavel struck the mahogany bench 3 times, each blow echoing through the packed courtroom like thunder. Judge Patricia Hawthorne's voice cut through the suffocating silence. All rise for Major General Rebecca Martinez. The entire courtroom erupted into a symphony of scraping chairs and rustling fabric as every person in attendance shot to their feet in military salute. Every person except my own family, who sat frozen in the 3rd row, their faces drained of color like ghosts witnessing their own funeral. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This moment of vindication came after years of being treated like a family embarrassment, a cautionary tale whispered about at holiday dinners I was no longer invited to attend. It started on a humid Thursday evening in August, 3 years prior, when I walked through the front door of my childhood home in suburban Phoenix for what I thought would be a celebration. I had just returned from a classified deployment in Eastern Europe, one that had kept me away for 14 months, without the ability to contact my family. The mission was successful beyond our expectations. We had prevented a humanitarian crisis that would have displaced hundreds of thousands of civilians, but the details remained locked behind layers of military classification. My younger brother Danny was getting married to his college sweetheart, Amanda Richardson, and I had managed to secure emergency leave to attend the ceremony. I expected warm embraces, maybe some tears of relief that their daughter had made it home safely. Instead, I was greeted by my mother's rigid posture and my father's cold stare from behind his reading glasses. "Rebecca," my mother said, not moving from her position at the kitchen counter where she was arranging flowers. "You're late." I set down my duffel bag, still wearing my travel clothes, dark jeans, and a simple gray sweater that hid the weight I had lost during deployment. "Mom, I literally just got off a military transport. I came straight from the airport." My father folded his newspaper with deliberate precision. Thomas Martinez had built a successful accounting firm from nothing, and he measured everything in life with the same methodical approach he used for balance sheets. "We weren't sure you were actually coming. You've been unreachable." The word hung in the air like an accusation. Unreachable. As if I had been deliberately ignoring them, rather than serving my country in a location where personal communication was impossible, for operational security reasons. "Dad, you know I can't always..." "Can't always what?" Danny's voice carried from the living room where he was assembling wedding favors with Amanda. "Can't you always remember you have a family? Can't always put us first for once?" I walked into the living room hoping to find some warmth in my little brother's face. Danny had always looked up to me when we were kids. I taught him how to throw a curveball, helped him with his math homework, and drove him to soccer practice when our parents were working late. But the man sitting on our mother's floral couch bore little resemblance to that admiring little boy. "Danny, I've been deployed. I literally couldn't contact anyone." Amanda looked up from the ribbons she was tying, her expression carefully neutral. "Deployed where? Doing what? You never tell us anything specific." The familiar knot formed in my stomach. How do you explain to civilians that some missions exist in the shadows for good reason? That the absence of details isn't secrecy for its own sake, but protection for everyone involved? "I can't discuss operational details, you know that." My father appeared in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly combed as always. "Can't discuss, can't contact, can't commit to family events. Seems like there's a lot you can't do, Rebecca." The disappointment in his voice was sharper than any blade. Thomas Martinez had always been proud of his children's achievements. Danny's engineering degree, my academic scholarships, our successes reflected his own values of hard work and dedication. But my military career had become something he couldn't quantify or understand, and what Thomas Martinez couldn't understand, he eventually came to resent. "I'm here now," I said quietly. "I'm here for Danny's wedding." "Are you?" my mother asked, joining us in the living room. Patricia Martinez had been a high school principal for 30 years before retiring, and she still carried that authoritative tone that could silence a rowdy teenager at 50 paces. "Because last Christmas you were supposed to be here, Thanksgiving before that, Danny's graduation, my surgery." Each missed event hit like a physical blow. I had missed my mother's gallbladder surgery because I was coordinating refugee evacuations in a war zone. I had missed Danny's engineering graduation because I was testifying before a classified military tribunal about intelligence failures that could have cost American lives. I had missed Christmas because hostile forces had been tracking military families, and my presence would have put everyone at risk. But I couldn't explain any of that. The words died in my throat, trapped behind walls of classification levels and security protocols. Mom, you know my job requires your job. She practically spat the words. Rebecca, when you were 18, you told us you were joining the military to serve your country and make a difference. We supported that. We were proud of you. But this isn't service. This is abandonment. The accusation landed like a physical blow. I had spent the last 15 years of my life in uniform, rising through ranks that most officers never even dream of reaching. I had prevented wars, saved lives, and sacrificed more than anyone in this room could possibly understand. And my own mother was calling it abandonment. You don't understand what I do. Because you won't tell us. Danny slammed his hand on the coffee table, making the wedding favor supplies jump. We're your family, Becca. We're supposed to matter. But every time we ask about your life, your work, your relationships, you shut us out. You disappear for months, show up without warning, then disappear again. We don't even know who you are anymore. Amanda reached over and took Danny's hand, a gesture that spoke volumes about where her loyalties lay. Maybe we should postpone this conversation until after the wedding. No, my father said firmly. This needs to be said. Rebecca, your mother and I have been talking. This family has been walking on eggshells around your schedule, your secrecy, your priorities for years. We've missed you at every important moment. We've worried ourselves sick every time the news reports something happening overseas. We've made excuses to our friends, to our community, to ourselves about why our daughter can't seem to prioritize her own family. I felt the walls closing in around me. These people had raised me, loved me, supported my dreams when I was young and idealistic. Now they were staring at me like I was a stranger who had wandered into their home uninvited. Danny, I said, turning to my brother with desperation creeping into my voice. This is your wedding week. Let's not do this now. He looked at me with eyes that held no trace of the little boy who used to beg me to read him bedtime stories. Actually, Becca, Amanda and I have been talking too. We don't want you at the wedding. The words hit me like a physical assault. I actually took a step backward, my hand instinctively reaching for the wall to steady myself. We want our wedding day to be about us, about our families coming together. Not about wondering if you're going to disappear in the middle of the reception because of some emergency. Not about fielding questions from guests about what you actually do for a living. Not about feeling like we're competing with classified missions for your attention. My mother nodded in agreement. We think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay while you're in town. And maybe you should think about whether this military career is really worth losing your family over. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA, my childhood memories, my last name, and realized I was completely alone. They had made their choice, and it wasn't me. I picked up my duffel bag from where I had dropped it by the door. My hands were steady. Years of military training had taught me to function under extreme stress. But inside, something was crumbling. I understand, I said, though I didn't understand anything at all. I'll find a hotel. Rebecca, my mother called as I reached the door. I turned back, hoping for some sign of reconciliation, some indication that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. When you decide that your family matters more than whatever it is you're really doing out there, you'll always have a place here, but until then. She gestured helplessly. We can't keep living in the shadow of your choices. I nodded once and walked out of the house where I had learned to ride a bike, where I had brought home my first report card, where I had announced my acceptance to West Point with such pride and excitement. The door closed behind me with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything I had once believed about love, loyalty, and belonging. Standing on the front porch in the desert heat, I realized that somewhere along the way, in my dedication to serving something greater than myself, I had lost the very people I thought I was protecting. The irony was devastating. I had spent my entire adult life keeping the world safe for families like mine, only to discover that my own family no longer had room for the person I had become in service to that mission. I drove to a Hampton Inn near the airport and checked in under my own name for the first time in months. As I sat on the generic hotel bed, staring at my phone with no one to call, I understood that this was my new reality. Major General Rebecca Martinez, decorated officer, strategic mastermind, protector of national interests, and now officially the daughter, sister, and family member that no one wanted around. The next morning, I would fly back to my base in Virginia, return to my duties, and continue serving my country. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my military career, I questioned whether the sacrifices I had made were worth the price I had paid. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt truly, completely alone. The transition from family member to family ghost happened gradually, then, all at once. Back at Fort Belvoir in Virginia, I threw myself into my work with the kind of intensity that worried my aide-de-camp, Captain James Chen. He had been assigned to my office for 8 months, and had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when his commanding officer was running on fumes and stubbornness. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. General Martinez, he said one Tuesday morning, setting a cup of coffee on my desk alongside a stack of intelligence briefings. You've been here since 0500 hours. Again. I didn't look up from the satellite images spread across my desk. The situation in Moldova won't resolve itself because I need beauty sleep, Captain. No, ma'am, but it also won't be resolved by an exhausted commanding officer making critical decisions on 3 hours of sleep. James had a point, but sleep had become elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's disappointed face or heard Danny's voice telling me I wasn't welcome at his wedding. Work was the only place where my value was unquestioned, where my sacrifices meant something tangible. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a brief, foolish moment, I hoped it might be from my family. Instead, it was from my neighbor in the officer housing complex. Package delivered to your door. Looks important. I found the package later that evening, a thick manila envelope with my brother's return address. Inside were wedding photos. Danny in his navy suit, Amanda radiant in ivory silk, my parents beaming with pride. There was a brief note in Danny's handwriting. Thought you should see how it turned out. The day was perfect. Perfect. The words stung more than any deliberate cruelty could have. They had created their perfect day by erasing me from it entirely. The weeks that followed established a new pattern. I excelled at my job, developing counterintelligence strategies, briefing senior Pentagon officials, coordinating with allied forces on sensitive operations. My professional reputation remained spotless, but my personal life became a series of declined invitations and unanswered messages. My mother's birthday came and went. I sent flowers and a card, received a polite but distant thank you text 3 days later. Father's Day earned me similar treatment. When I called to check in, conversations were brief and superficial, filled with the kind of small talk you'd make with a distant acquaintance. How's the weather in Virginia? My mother would ask. Fine. How's Dad's golf game? Oh, you know your father. Still thinks he can outdrive men half his age. Silence. Well, I should let you go. I'm sure you're busy. And that was it. No questions about my work, my health, my life. No sharing of family news or neighborhood gossip. I had become a polite stranger they occasionally felt obligated to acknowledge. The isolation was most acute during holidays. Thanksgiving arrived like a punch to the gut. I had no assignment that required my presence, no urgent crisis to justify missing family dinner. I simply wasn't invited. Instead, I sat in my empty base apartment, eating takeout Chinese food and reviewing personnel files. Through the thin walls, I could hear Colonel Patricia Williams next door hosting her extended family. Laughter, children playing, the warm chaos of people who belonged together. Christmas was worse. I volunteered to work holiday duty, partly to give younger officers time with their families, partly because I had nowhere else to go. On Christmas morning, I received a group text from Danny. Merry Christmas, everyone. Thanks for making this such a special day. The message had been sent to at least a dozen recipients, a mass communication that made me feel even more excluded than if he had said nothing at all. My assistant noticed the change. Captain Chen had a gift for observing without prying, but even his professional discretion had limits. General, if you don't mind me saying, you seem different lately. We were preparing for a briefing with the Joint Chiefs, and I was reviewing my notes with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. Different how, Captain? More isolated, ma'am. You used to ask about my family, remember details about people's lives. Lately you seem... He searched for diplomatic words. Disconnected. He was right. I had begun treating my colleagues with the same emotional distance my family had shown me. If personal relationships were a liability, if caring about people only led to disappointment and abandonment, then perhaps it was safer to maintain professional barriers with everyone. I'm fine, Captain. Let's focus on the briefing. But I wasn't fine, and the pretense was becoming harder to maintain. During a joint operation planning session with NATO allies, British Colonel Sarah Morrison made a casual comment about family obligations affecting deployment schedules. The conversation turned to how military families navigate long separations, and I found myself sitting silent while other officers shared stories about understanding spouses and patient children. What about you, General Martinez? Colonel Morrison asked. How does your family handle your demanding schedule? The question hit like a physical blow. I managed to maintain my composure, but the pause before my answer stretched too long. Military families learn to adapt, I said finally, which was true, but completely avoided the reality of my situation. Later, as the meeting broke up, Colonel Morrison approached me privately. I hope I didn't overstep earlier. I sensed there might be complications at home. Her kindness was almost harder to bear than my family's rejection. It's a common challenge in our line of work, I replied, maintaining professional distance even as part of me wanted to confess everything to this near stranger who had shown more concern for my welfare than my own blood relatives. The real test came in April when I learned that Danny and Amanda were expecting their first child. The news came through a Facebook announcement that appeared in my feed like an ambush. Photos of ultrasound images, excited comments from extended family, plans for baby showers, and nursery preparations. I was witnessing my brother's joy through the same social media platform I used to follow celebrities and former colleagues. I called Danny directly, hoping that news of this magnitude might bridge the gap between us. Congratulations, I said when he answered. I saw the announcement. You must be thrilled. Oh, Rebecca, thanks. His voice carried none of the excitement I had seen in his Facebook posts. Yeah, we're pretty excited. Boy or girl? Too early to tell. We'll find out in a few months. The conversation felt like performing surgery with oven mitts. Technically possible, but impossibly clumsy. If you need anything... We're good, he interrupted. Amanda's parents are already planning to help out, and Mom's over the moon about becoming a grandmother. Grandmother? I was going to be an aunt, and apparently that was the first time anyone had bothered to inform me directly. Well, congratulations again. I'm happy for you both. Thanks. Look, I should go. Amanda's waiting for me. The call ended with the same polite distance that had characterized all our interactions since the wedding confrontation. I sat in my office afterward, staring at the commendations and awards covering my walls, and realized that all my professional achievements felt hollow when I had no one to share them with. My aide knocked and entered with another stack of briefings. General, the Pentagon wants your assessment of the situation in the Balkans by the end of week. Of course they do, I said, turning back to my computer screen. What else is new? Captain Chen hesitated at the door. Ma'am, my wife is hosting a barbecue this weekend. Small gathering, mostly military families. You'd be welcome to join us. The invitation was genuine, and I could see in his expression that he understood more about my situation than I had realized. For a moment, I considered imagining myself at a normal social gathering, surrounded by people who understood military life, perhaps finding some small sense of belonging. But accepting would mean acknowledging how desperate I had become for human connection. It would mean admitting that Major General Rebecca Martinez, who commanded respect from international allies and strikes fear into hostile intelligence services, couldn't manage to maintain relationships with the people who had known her longest. Thank you, Captain, but I have work to catch up on. He nodded without surprise, as if he had expected that answer but felt obligated to try anyway. As he left, I returned to my satellite images and intelligence reports, the only world where I still felt competent and valued. Outside my office window, I could see families walking across the base, children playing in small groups while their parents chatted nearby. It was a world I had protected countless times but no longer felt part of. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had become an expert at defending what I couldn't seem to keep for myself. The summons arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, delivered by a federal marshal who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Captain Chen signed for the official document while I was in a strategy meeting, and when I returned to my office, the manila envelope sat on my desk like an unexploded ordnance. United States District Court for the District of Arizona. The plaintiff's name made my blood run cold. Blackwater Defense Solutions versus Major General Rebecca Martinez, United States Army. Inside were legal documents thick enough to choke a horse, but the essence was simple and devastating. Blackwater, a private military contractor, was suing me personally for $50 million in damages. They claimed that the intelligence I had provided during Operation Silent Thunder in Eastern Europe had been deliberately falsified, leading to the termination of their lucrative government contracts and irreparable damage to their corporate reputation. The accusations were as detailed as they were false. According to their filing, I had allegedly fabricated evidence of civilian casualties to undermine their operations, conspired with foreign intelligence services to discredit American contractors, and violated multiple federal statutes in my reckless pursuit of personal glory and advancement. My hands didn't shake as I read the documents. Years of military training had taught me to maintain composure under fire, but my mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was character assassination with legal backing. Even if I ultimately prevailed, the mere existence of these allegations would destroy my career and reputation. Captain Chen knocked and entered, his expression carefully neutral. "General, I've been fielding calls from military legal. They want to speak with you immediately." "What kind of calls?" "The kind where they use words like congressional inquiry and media containment, ma'am." Within hours, my world had shifted from routine military operations to crisis management. Colonel Michael Brooks, from the Judge Advocate General's office, arrived that afternoon, carrying briefcases full of legal precedents and looking like he'd aged 5 years since morning. "Rebecca," he said, abandoning formal protocol in his urgency, "this is bad. Blackwater has serious political backing, and they're claiming you cost them over $200 million in terminated contracts. Michael, you know me, you know my record. Every piece of intelligence I provided was verified through multiple sources. I believe you, but belief doesn't matter in federal court. What matters is what we can prove, and Blackwater has somehow obtained classified documents that appear to support their version of events." He spread photocopied pages across my conference table. At first glance, they looked authentic. My signature, proper formatting, official letterheads. But as I studied them more closely, subtle inconsistencies emerged. Wrong classification markings, slightly altered dates, language that didn't match my standard reporting style. "These are fabrications," I said with certainty, "professional forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Can you prove that?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Proving documents were forged would require access to classified systems, testimony from personnel who might not even admit to knowing me, and cooperation from agencies that prioritized institutional protection over individual justice. It will be complicated. Complicated doesn't win court cases, Rebecca, and there's more. He pulled out another document. Blackwater has filed for expedited proceedings. The trial is scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and it's been assigned to Judge Patricia Hawthorne in Phoenix. Phoenix, my hometown, where my family lived their comfortable lives, blissfully unaware that their disowned daughter was about to become the center of a legal tornado that would make national headlines. "The media attention will be significant," Colonel Brooks continued. "Military contractor corruption, classified intelligence, potential war crimes allegations. This has all the elements of a major story. Your name will be in every newspaper in the country." I thought about my parents reading about their daughter in the morning paper, learning about my alleged crimes alongside their coffee and toast. I imagined Danny and Amanda discussing whether they should change their last name to avoid association with me. The thought was almost more painful than the lawsuit itself. "There's something else," Colonel Brooks said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Blackwater's legal team has been asking questions about your family. Background research, they claim, but it feels like intimidation. My blood turned to ice. What kind of questions? Your father's accounting firm, your brother's engineering company, your mother's pension from the school district. Nothing overtly threatening, but the message is clear. They're willing to make this personal. The audacity was breathtaking. Not content with destroying my career, they were threatening the family that had already cast me out. It was like kicking someone who was already down, then lighting them on fire for good measure. I need to tell my family, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. They deserve to know what's coming. Rebecca, are you sure that's wise, given your situation with them? The careful way he phrased it told me that my family estrangement was common knowledge among my colleagues. In the military, where family support was considered crucial for career success, my isolation had apparently been noted and discussed. That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone for 2 hours before finally calling my mother. The conversation was stilted and brief. Mom, I need to tell you something important. I'm being sued by a defense contractor. It's going to be in the news, and there might be reporters asking questions about our family. Long pause. What kind of lawsuit? They're claiming I provided false intelligence that cost them money. It's not true, but the trial will be public, and it might get messy. Another pause, longer this time. Rebecca, what did you do? The question hit like a physical blow. Not, are you okay, or how can we help, but what did you do? The assumption of guilt from my own mother was devastating. I did my job, Mom. I served my country with integrity. But sometimes that's not enough. We'll deal with whatever comes, she said finally. But Rebecca, maybe this is a sign that you should consider a different path. Maybe it's time to come home. Come home? To what? To a family that had already decided I didn't belong? To parents who assumed I was guilty before hearing my side of the story? I have to fight this, Mom. My reputation, my career, everything I've worked for is at stake. Sometimes the cost of fighting is higher than the cost of walking away. After we hung up, I realized she still didn't understand. This wasn't about pride or stubbornness. If I didn't fight these allegations, they would follow me for the rest of my life. Every future job, every relationship, every opportunity would be tainted by the assumption that I was a corrupt officer who had betrayed her duty. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal preparation and media speculation. True to Colonel Brooks' prediction, the story exploded across national news. Military general accused of intelligence fraud. Pentagon corruption scandal rocks defense establishment. War hero or war criminal. My photo, an official military portrait from 5 years earlier, appeared on television screens and newspaper front pages across the country. Talking heads debated my guilt or innocence with the confidence of people who had never met me and knew nothing about my service record. Through it all, my family remained silent. No calls offering support, no public statements defending my character, no indication that they even cared about the outcome. I was facing the fight of my life completely alone. 2 days before the trial was scheduled to begin, I received an unexpected visitor. General Marcus Hamilton, my former commanding officer and mentor, appeared at my door looking like he'd aged a decade since our last meeting. Rebecca, he said simply, I came to tell you that there are people who know the truth. People who remember what really happened in Eastern Europe. When the time comes, you won't be fighting this alone. It was the first indication I had had that anyone with credibility was willing to stand up for me. But as I prepared for the legal battle ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into an ambush designed by people who had far more resources and fewer scruples than I could imagine. The trial would begin on Monday morning in a Phoenix courthouse, just miles from the family home where I was no longer welcome. Justice, truth, and my entire future hung in the balance. Monday morning arrived with the kind of desert heat that made Phoenix feel like the surface of Mars. I stood outside the federal courthouse at 7:30 a.m., wearing my dress blue uniform for what might be the last time in my military career. The media circus was already in full swing. News vans lined the street, reporters jockeying for position, cameras tracking my every movement like predators following wounded prey. Colonel Brooks met me at the courthouse steps, his expression grim. The gallery's packed. Blackwater flew in their entire executive team, and they've got 3 tables full of lawyers. This is going to be intense. Inside the courthouse, I was struck by how sterile everything felt. Marble floors that echoed with every footstep, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look vaguely ill, American flags hanging limp in the recycled air. This was where my fate would be decided, in a room that felt more like a corporate boardroom than a temple of justice. I took my seat at the defendant's table and finally allowed myself to look at the gallery. The courtroom was indeed packed, but what caught my attention wasn't the sea of unfamiliar faces, or the Blackwater executives in their expensive suits. It was the third row, where my family sat like they were attending a funeral. My mother wore her navy blue dress, the one she reserved for serious occasions like graduations and memorial services. My father sat rigidly beside her, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. Danny and Amanda were there too. Danny in a suit I'd never seen before, Amanda clutching her purse like a shield. They had come to witness my public humiliation, though whether out of morbid curiosity or familial obligation, I couldn't tell. Our eyes met for a brief moment across the courtroom. My mother's face showed no warmth, no encouragement, just the kind of resigned disappointment I'd seen so many times before. They were here, but they weren't here for me. Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered precisely at 9 a.m., and everyone rose. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that suggested she'd seen enough courtroom drama to be unimpressed by whatever circus was about to unfold. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. "We're here for the matter of Blackwater Defense Solutions versus Major General Rebecca Martinez. This court will hear opening statements, after which we'll proceed with witness testimony." Blackwater's lead attorney, a shark named Vincent Torritoano, delivered an opening statement that painted me as a rogue officer who had fabricated intelligence reports to advance my own career while destroying an honest American company. His voice was smooth, confident, designed to convince a jury that patriotism meant supporting private contractors over military officers who questioned their methods. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Torino concluded, "the evidence will show that Rebecca Martinez betrayed her oath, betrayed her country, and betrayed the brave men and women of Blackwater Defense who were simply trying to serve American interests abroad." Colonel Brooks' opening was more subdued, focused on my service record and the complexity of military intelligence operations. But I could see in the jurors' faces that Torino's theatrical performance had made an impact. The morning proceeded with a parade of Blackwater executives and former employees testifying about the devastating impact my alleged false reports had on their operations. Charts showing lost revenue, graphs depicting damaged relationships with foreign governments, testimony about loyal American contractors who had lost their jobs because of my reckless actions. Through it all, I sat silently, watching my reputation being systematically demolished by people who had never served a day in uniform. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. I was being accused of unpatriotic behavior by war profiteers who measured patriotism in quarterly earnings. Just before the lunch recess, Torino called his star witness, Lieutenant Colonel David Nash, a former military intelligence officer who claimed to have worked closely with me in Eastern Europe. Nash took the stand wearing a perfectly pressed civilian suit, his military bearings still evident despite his transition to private sector work. "Colonel Nash," Torino began, "please tell the court about your experience working with the defendant." Nash's testimony was devastating and completely fabricated. He claimed I had pressured him to alter intelligence reports, that I had shown reckless disregard for contractor safety, that I had made decisions based on personal animosity rather than objective analysis. Every word was delivered with military precision and apparent sincerity. "In your professional opinion," Torino asked, "did Major General Martinez's actions constitute a breach of military protocol?" "Absolutely," Nash replied without hesitation. "Her conduct was not only unprofessional, but potentially treasonous." The word treasonous hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I could feel every eye in the courtroom focused on me, measuring my reaction. In the gallery, my family's faces showed various degrees of shock and dismay. My mother's hand had moved to cover her mouth, as if she was trying to prevent herself from gasping aloud. Judge Hawthorne called for lunch recess, and I stood on shaking legs. This was going worse than my worst-case scenarios. Nash's testimony was pure fiction, but it was delivered with such conviction that even I might have believed it if I hadn't been there. During the break, Colonel Brooks tried to reassure me. We knew they'd bring in false witnesses. Our afternoon witnesses will tell the real story. But I wasn't sure it would matter. The damage was being done in real time, broadcast on national television, archived forever in court transcripts. Even if I won this case, the accusations would follow me for the rest of my life. At 1:30 p.m., we reconvened for the afternoon session. Colonel Brooks called his first witness, Sergeant Major Patricia Williams, my former operations chief who had served with me in Eastern Europe. She was a career soldier with 22 years of service, and her testimony began to chip away at Nash's fabrications. "Ma'am," Brooks asked, "in your experience, did Major General Martinez ever ask you to falsify intelligence reports?" "Never," Williams replied firmly. The general was meticulous about accuracy. She often delayed operations to verify intelligence, even when it meant missing tactical opportunities. But Williams' testimony was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors swung open, and a figure in military dress blues strode down the center aisle with unmistakable command presence. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned to track the new arrival. Even Judge Hawthorne looked surprised as the figure approached the witness stand area. It was General Marcus Hamilton, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, holder of the Medal of Honor, and one of the most respected military leaders of the past 30 years. His chest displayed more ribbons and decorations than most officers see in their entire careers. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded hundreds of thousands of troops. "Your Honor," General Hamilton said, addressing the bench directly, "I apologize for the interruption, but I have urgent testimony relevant to this case." Judge Hawthorne looked startled but not displeased. "General Hamilton, this is highly irregular." "Yes, ma'am, but so is allowing perjured testimony to destroy the reputation of one of America's finest officers." The courtroom erupted in whispers and shuffling. Torino shot to his feet. "Objection! This is a clear violation of procedure." But General Hamilton wasn't finished. He turned to face the gallery, his gaze sweeping across the packed courtroom before settling on my family in the third row. "I've sat in this gallery for the past 4 hours listening to lies about Major General Rebecca Martinez," he continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I've heard her called unpatriotic, reckless, and treasonous by people who have never worn the uniform or made the sacrifices required to keep this country safe." He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the statement that would change everything. Major General Martinez didn't falsify intelligence reports. She prevented a war crime. The operation Blackwater is referencing involved a planned strike on a refugee camp that they knew contained civilians. General Martinez's quotes were accurate warnings that saved 300 innocent lives, including 67 children. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a whisper, not a cough, not even the sound of breathing. Every person in that courtroom understood they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Judge Hawthorne's gavel struck the bench 3 times, each blow echoing through the stunned silence. "All rise for Major General Rebecca Martinez." The entire courtroom erupted into standing salutes. Military personnel, veterans in the gallery, even some civilians who understood the magnitude of what they had just heard. The only people who remained seated were the Blackwater executives and my own family, who sat frozen in shock as the truth finally emerged from years of buried classified files. I looked across the courtroom at my parents, my brother, my sister-in-law, and saw something I hadn't seen in their faces for years: uncertainty. For the first time since my exile began, they were questioning their assumptions about who I was and what I had done with my life. The moment stretched like a held breath, full of possibility and truth finally given voice. The courtroom chaos that followed General Hamilton's revelation took 20 minutes to subdue. Judge Hawthorne repeatedly struck her gavel, calling for order while reporters frantically scribbled notes and photographers captured every angle of the unfolding drama. Torino looked like a man who had just watched his career implode in real time, while the Blackwater executives huddled in urgent whispered conferences. When order was finally restored, Judge Hawthorne addressed General Hamilton directly. "General, your entrance was highly irregular, but your testimony appears to be material to this case. I'm going to allow you to take the stand, but I expect proper legal procedure from this point forward." General Hamilton nodded crisply. "Understood, Your Honor." As he was sworn in, I noticed Colonel Brooks frantically shuffling through his papers. This wasn't part of our planned defense strategy. Hamilton's appearance was as much a surprise to us as it was to everyone else in the courtroom. "General Hamilton," Colonel Brooks began once he recovered his composure, "please state your relationship to Major General Martinez." "I was Rebecca's commanding officer during Operation Silent Thunder in Eastern Europe. I personally reviewed every intelligence report she filed during that deployment." "And in your professional opinion, were those reports accurate?" Hamilton's expression hardened. "Not only were they accurate, they were courageously accurate. General Martinez uncovered intelligence about planned strikes on civilian targets that certain parties wanted to keep buried." Torino shot to his feet. "Objection! This witness is making allegations without foundation." "Your Honor," Hamilton continued before the judge could rule, "I have documentation that will substantiate every claim I'm making. Documentation that certain parties have gone to great lengths to suppress." Judge Hawthorne leaned forward. "What kind of documentation, General?" Hamilton reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder sealed with multiple classification stamps. "Declassified operational files from Operation Silent Thunder, including communications between Blackwater executives and foreign intelligence assets, payment records for fabricated intelligence, and evidence of a coordinated effort to discredit Major General Martinez when she refused to approve strikes on civilian targets." The courtroom exploded again. Torino was on his feet, shouting objections, while the Blackwater executives looked like they were calculating the distance to the nearest exit. My family sat in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Judge Hawthorne examined the documents for several minutes before speaking. "These appear to be properly declassified military files. I'm going to allow this evidence, but I'm also calling a recess so both sides can review these materials." During the 30-minute recess, Colonel Brooks and I huddled in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. The declassified files painted a picture that was even more damning than I had imagined. "Rebecca," Brooks said, spreading the documents across the table, "this shows a conspiracy that goes far beyond false accusations. Blackwater was being paid by foreign intelligence services to provide targeting information that would destabilize the region. When you refused to validate their intelligence, you didn't just save civilian lives, you prevented an international incident that could have triggered a broader conflict." The files contained email exchanges between Blackwater executives and contacts in 3 different countries, payment schedules for intelligence services, and most damning of all, recorded conversations discussing how to neutralize the Martinez problem when I continued to file accurate reports that contradicted their fabricated intelligence. "Look at this," Brooks said, pointing to a transcript dated 6 months after my deployment ended. "They've been planning this lawsuit for over 2 years, gathering falsified evidence and recruiting witnesses like Nash to testify against you." I stared at Lieutenant Colonel Nash's real service record, which showed he had never served in Eastern Europe at all. His entire testimony had been pure fiction, delivered by a man who had been recruited and coached specifically to destroy my credibility. "There's more," Brooks continued, flipping to another section. "They've been monitoring your family, your career, even your personal relationships. This isn't just about money. They wanted to completely destroy you as a person." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those years of isolation, the growing distance from my family, the missed opportunities and broken relationships, they hadn't been the natural consequences of my career choices. They had been the result of a deliberate campaign to isolate and discredit me. When court reconvened, General Hamilton took the stand again, with the declassified files as evidence. His testimony methodically dismantled every aspect of Blackwater's case. These documents show that Blackwater Defense Solutions was operating as an unregistered foreign agent, Hamilton testified. They were providing intelligence services to hostile nations while maintaining contracts with the United States government. When Major General Martinez discovered this arrangement and refused to validate their fabricated intelligence, they initiated a campaign to destroy her professionally and personally. Torino's cross-examination was desperate and ineffective. How do you discredit a Medal of Honor recipient who's presenting official government documents? Every question he asked only served to further expose the depth of Blackwater's deception. General Hamilton, Torino attempted, isn't it true that you have a personal relationship with the defendant that might bias your testimony? Hamilton's response was delivered with the kind of icy precision that had made him legendary among military leaders. Mr. Torino, I have a personal relationship with the truth, something your clients seem to find threatening. The afternoon brought a parade of additional witnesses that Colonel Brooks had somehow managed to assemble. Intelligence officers who had worked with me in Eastern Europe testified about my meticulous attention to accuracy. Foreign diplomats appeared via video link to confirm that my reports had prevented a humanitarian crisis. Even former Blackwater employees came forward to testify about the company's corrupt practices. The most devastating testimony came from Dr. Sarah Chen, a civilian analyst who had been contracted by Blackwater to review intelligence reports. She took the stand carrying a laptop and a stack of printouts that would prove to be the final nail in Blackwater's coffin. Dr. Chen, Colonel Brooks asked, did you review the intelligence reports filed by Major General Martinez? I did. I was specifically asked to find discrepancies or inaccuracies that could be used to discredit her. And what did you find? Dr. Chen opened her laptop and projected a series of satellite images onto the courtroom's display screen. I found that every single report filed by Major General Martinez was not only accurate, but demonstrated an extraordinary level of precision and insight. The locations she identified as civilian targets were indeed refugee camps, schools, and hospitals. The Blackwater intelligence claiming these were military targets was completely fabricated. She clicked to the next image, showing aerial footage of a refugee camp. This is the site that Blackwater wanted to designate as a military target. As you can see, it housed over 300 civilians, mostly women and children fleeing conflict in the region. The images were devastating. Children playing in makeshift playgrounds, families gathered around cooking fires, clearly marked medical tents providing humanitarian aid. The idea that anyone could have mistaken this for a military target was absurd. Dr. Chen, Brooks continued, did Blackwater ask you to falsify your analysis? They offered me a substantial bonus if I could find evidence of inaccuracies in General Martinez's reports. When I told them no such evidence existed, they terminated my contract and threatened legal action if I discussed my findings with anyone. By late afternoon, the case against me had completely collapsed. Torino made a motion to dismiss without prejudice, essentially admitting defeat while trying to preserve the possibility of future legal action. Judge Hawthorne denied the motion and instead called for a directed verdict in my favor. The evidence presented today shows not only that Major General Martinez is innocent of the allegations against her, but that she has been the victim of a systematic campaign of harassment and defamation by the plaintiff. This court finds in favor of the defendant on all counts. But Judge Hawthorne wasn't finished. She turned to address the Blackwater executives directly. Furthermore, the evidence presented suggests that Blackwater Defense Solutions has committed multiple federal crimes, including fraud, conspiracy, and acting as an unregistered foreign agent. I am referring this matter to the Department of Justice for immediate investigation. The courtroom erupted in chaos as federal marshals moved to detain the Blackwater executives. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and security guards struggled to maintain order. Through it all, I sat in stunned silence, trying to process that the nightmare that had consumed my life for years was finally over. In the gallery, my family remained seated while chaos swirled around them. For the first time in years, my mother was looking directly at me, and in her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen since childhood. Pride mixed with shame, recognition mixed with regret. The truth had finally emerged, but at what cost? How do you rebuild relationships that have been shattered by years of misunderstanding and deliberate manipulation? The chaos in the courtroom eventually subsided, But the real confrontation was just beginning. As federal marshals led the Blackwater executives away in handcuffs, I found myself standing alone near the defendant's table, watching 3 years of nightmare finally come to an end. The gallery had mostly emptied, reporters rushing to file their stories about the dramatic reversal and conspiracy exposure, but my family remained in their seats, seemingly frozen by the magnitude of what they had witnessed. Colonel Brooks approached, his face showing a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "Rebecca, you need to know, General Hamilton contacted me last week. He'd been working behind the scenes for months to get those files declassified. He knew this day was coming." I nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "Where is he?" "He had to leave for Washington immediately. Congressional hearings, media briefings, damage control. But he wanted me to give you this." Brooks handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Hamilton's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a brief note. "Rebecca, the truth always surfaces eventually, but it takes courage to dive deep enough to find it. Your country owes you a debt it can never fully repay. Welcome back to the light. Marcus?" I looked across the nearly empty courtroom and saw my family still sitting in the third row, engaged in what appeared to be an intense whispered discussion. My mother kept gesturing toward me, while my father sat with his head in his hands. Danny and Amanda looked like they were witnessing the aftermath of a natural disaster. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward them. Each step felt like crossing a minefield, 3 years of hurt and misunderstanding lying between us like unexploded ordnance. When I reached their row, they looked up at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Shame, confusion, maybe the beginnings of understanding. "Mom, Dad." I stood in the aisle, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. "Thank you for coming." My mother stood first, her hands trembling slightly. "Rebecca, we had no idea. All these years we thought—" "You thought I was the problem," I finished quietly. "I understand why." "No," my father said, rising to his feet with effort that seemed to go beyond physical strain. "No, you don't understand. We failed you. We failed you so completely that I don't know how to begin apologizing." The words hung in the air between us. Thomas Martinez, the man who had built his life on certainty and measured success, was admitting to a failure that couldn't be balanced on any ledger. "Dad, you couldn't have known about the conspiracy. We should have known you," my mother interrupted, her voice breaking. "We should have known our own daughter well enough to trust her character over rumors and silence. We should have asked more questions instead of making assumptions." Danny stepped into the aisle, his face pale but determined. "Becca, I owe you the biggest apology of all. I was angry that you missed my wedding, but you were out there saving children's lives. While I was worried about centerpieces and seating charts, you were preventing war crimes." The irony wasn't lost on any of us. While they had been celebrating family milestones, I had been fighting battles they couldn't imagine, making sacrifices they couldn't understand, carrying burdens they couldn't share. "The wedding," I said softly. "You said you wanted a perfect day without complications." "I was a selfish idiot," Danny replied without hesitation. "I wanted perfection, but I threw away what was actually perfect. Having my hero sister there to celebrate with us." Amanda stepped forward hesitantly. "Rebecca, I was the one who convinced Danny you shouldn't come to the wedding. I was jealous of how much he admired you, afraid I'd never measure up to his big sister, the war hero. I'm so sorry." The admissions were coming in a flood now, years of resentment and misunderstanding finally being acknowledged, but I felt strangely numb to it all. The vindication I had dreamed of for so long felt hollow when it came wrapped in their shame and regret. "I don't need apologies," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I need to know if there's still room for me in this family." The question silenced them all. It wasn't about blame or guilt anymore. It was about whether we could build something new from the wreckage of what we had once been. My mother stepped closer, her eyes filling with tears she had been holding back for hours. "Rebecca, there was always room for you. We forgot how to show it. We forgot how to love someone whose life we couldn't understand." "The hardest part," my father added, his voice hoarse with emotion, "was watching you become someone extraordinary while feeling like we were becoming strangers to you. We didn't know how to bridge that gap, So we convinced ourselves it was your choice to leave us behind. I looked at these 4 people who shared my blood, my history, my childhood memories, and realized that we were all victims of the same systematic campaign to isolate me. Blackwater hadn't just attacked my career. They had poisoned my personal relationships by making my family feel abandoned and forgotten. They won by making us turn against each other, I said quietly. The real victory isn't in the courtroom, it's in refusing to let them destroy what matters most. Danny moved closer, his eyes bright with unshed tears. So, where do we go from here? How do we fix this? The question hung in the air like a challenge. We couldn't undo 3 years of separation, couldn't erase the pain of missed milestones and broken trust. But we could choose what happened next. We start with the truth, I said. I can't tell you about every mission, every deployment, every classified operation. But I can tell you why I do this work, what it means to me, and how much I've missed being part of this family. My mother nodded through her tears. And we start by remembering that love doesn't require understanding everything. We love you for who you are, not for what we think you should be. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of several reporters who had lingered in the courthouse, hoping for interviews and reactions to the day's revelations. I saw them coming and felt my family instinctively move closer to me, forming a protective circle. General Martinez, one reporter called out, "How does it feel to be vindicated after years of persecution?" I looked at my family standing beside me, not behind me, not separate from me, but beside me as a united front, and realized that vindication had never been about legal victories or public recognition. "It feels like coming home," I said simply. The reporters pressed for more details, more dramatic quotes, more sensational soundbites, but I was done performing for other people's entertainment. I was done letting other people define my worth or my relationships. "That's all I have to say," I told them firmly. "Today is about family." As we walked out of the courthouse together, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the simple comfort of belonging somewhere. The Phoenix heat hit us like a wall as we emerged into the late afternoon sunlight, but for the first time in years, I wasn't facing it alone. "Rebecca," my father said as we paused on the courthouse steps, "there's something else, something we should have done years ago." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a gold locket I recognized from my childhood. My grandmother's locket passed down through generations of Martinez women. "This belonged to your great-grandmother, who came to this country with nothing but hope and determination. It was supposed to go to you when you graduated from West Point. But, well, we let pride and misunderstanding get in the way." He fastened the chain around my neck with hands that shook slightly. "She would have been proud of who you became. We should have been proud too." Standing on those courthouse steps with my family around me, wearing my great-grandmother's locket and my dress blue uniform, I finally understood something that had eluded me for years. Real strength isn't about standing alone against the world. It's about having people who will stand with you when the world tries to tear you down. The legal battle was over, but the real victory was just beginning. 6 months after the trial, I stood in the kitchen of my childhood home, teaching my 8-month-old nephew Marcus how to clap his tiny hands together. He giggled each time our palms met, his dark eyes, so much like Danny's at that age, sparkling with innocent joy. Amanda sat at the kitchen table, no longer the defensive young woman who had once seen me as a threat, but a new mother grateful for an extra pair of experienced hands. "He loves you already," she said, watching Marcus reach for the silver stars on my uniform collar. "Danny was right. You're a natural with kids." The observations surprised me. I had spent so many years focused on protecting children I'd never met that I had forgotten what it felt like to simply enjoy a child's company. Marcus didn't care about my service record or classified missions. He only cared that I made funny faces and played peekaboo with unwavering dedication. "Rebecca," Amanda continued, her voice carrying a vulnerability I'd never heard before, "I owe you an explanation about the wedding. It wasn't really about logistics or complications." I looked up from Marcus, who was now trying to eat my name tag. "Amanda, you don't." "Yes, I do." She set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "I was terrified that Danny would always compare me to you. His brilliant sister who served her country, who had adventures I couldn't imagine, who represented everything I thought I could never be. I convinced myself that excluding you was protecting my marriage, but really I was just protecting my own insecurities. The honesty in her voice made me realize how much we had all been prisoners of our own fears. I never wanted to be a standard you had to measure up to, I said quietly. I just wanted to be Danny's sister. I know that now. And I want you to know that Marcus will grow up hearing stories about his Aunt Rebecca. The real stories, not the distorted versions we created in our own minds. The conversation was interrupted by Danny bursting through the back door, his engineering uniform streaked with concrete dust from the construction site he'd been supervising. His face lit up when he saw me holding his son. There's my favorite nephew and my favorite sister, he announced, kissing Amanda's forehead before reaching for Marcus. How's the little guy today? Aunt Rebecca taught him a new song, Amanda reported. Something about marching ants. The army cadence? Danny grinned. Mom's gonna love that. She's been worried Marcus won't have enough masculine influences in his life. It was strange how easily we had slipped back into sibling dynamics, as if the 3 years of separation had been just a temporary interruption rather than a fundamental fracture. But I knew the healing wasn't complete for any of us. Trust, once broken, required constant maintenance to rebuild. My phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Chen. General, your 3 p.m. meeting with Senator Williams has been moved to 4 p.m. Also, General Hamilton called. He wants to discuss your new assignment. The new assignment. For 3 months, I had been in a professional limbo, while the Pentagon determined how to handle an officer who had become a national hero and a security risk simultaneously. My face was too recognizable now for covert operations, but my expertise was too valuable to waste on a desk job. Work? Danny asked, noticing my expression as I read the message. The future, apparently. I handed Marcus back to his father. I have a meeting about a new position. Teaching at the War College, developing curriculum for intelligence officers. That sounds perfect, Amanda said. You'd be training the next generation, passing on what you've learned. The idea had grown on me over the past few weeks. After years of operating in shadows, the prospect of working in an environment where knowledge was meant to be shared rather than concealed appealed to me. Young officers needed to understand not just the technical aspects of intelligence work, but the ethical complexities that came with power and access to classified information. There's something else, I continued, feeling nervous about their reaction. The position would be based here in Arizona, 45 minutes from Phoenix. The silence that followed was loaded with possibilities. Danny and Amanda exchanged glances, and I could see them processing what my staying local would mean for their family dynamics. You'd be close enough for Sunday dinners, Danny said finally. And babysitting duty, Amanda added with a smile that seemed genuine. And holidays, I said, testing the waters. All of them. Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, random Tuesday dinners if you'll have me. My mother's voice came from the living room, where she had been eavesdropping without shame. Did someone say Sunday dinners? I'll need to buy a bigger roast. Quote. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, her reading glasses perched on her nose, looking more like the woman who had raised me and less like the stranger who had cast me out. The transformation hadn't been instant or easy. We had spent hours in conversations that were sometimes painful, sometimes healing, always necessary. Mom, I said, are you sure you're ready for me to be a regular fixture around here? I'm not exactly the easiest dinner guest. Patricia Martinez, former high school principal and current grandmother extraordinaire, fixed me with the look that had intimidated countless teenagers. Rebecca Elena Martinez, you are my daughter. This is your home. The only question is whether you're ready to let us be your family again. The use of my full name, something she had only done when I was in serious trouble as a child, made me smile despite the emotional weight of the moment. Some things never change, and sometimes that's exactly what you need. I'm ready, I said, and meant it completely. My father's voice drifted in from his study, where he was supposedly working on tax returns but had actually been listening to every word. Rebecca, could you come here for a minute? I found him standing behind his desk, holding an envelope that looked official and important. Thomas Martinez had aged in the months since the trial, but the change seemed less about time passing and more about burdens lifting. "This came for you today," he said, handing me the envelope. "From the Pentagon." Inside was a formal letter signed by the Secretary of Defense, officially commending my service and announcing my selection for the Distinguished Service Medal, one of the military's highest non-combat decorations. But it was the handwritten note paperclipped to the official document that made my throat tighten with emotion. It was from General Hamilton. "Rebecca, your courage in Eastern Europe saved lives. Your courage in that courtroom saved your career. Your courage in rebuilding your family relationships saves your soul. The Army needs officers who understand that strength comes not from standing alone, but from knowing what you're fighting to protect. Welcome to your new mission." I looked up to find my father watching me with tears in his eyes. "I never understood what you were fighting for," he said quietly. "I thought it was about glory or career advancement or some abstract idea of duty. But it was always about protecting families like ours, wasn't it?" Quote, "It still is," I said, folding the letter carefully. "It always will be." That evening, we gathered around the dining room table for what my mother declared the first official Sunday dinner of our new normal. The table was set with her good china, the kind she had saved for special occasions when I was growing up. Marcus sat in a high chair between Danny and Amanda, wearing a bib that read "Future General" in block letters. "To new beginnings," my father said, raising his glass of wine. "To family," my mother added. "To coming home," I said, looking around the table at these people who had hurt me and whom I had hurt, who had doubted me and whom I had failed to trust, who had let me go and whom I had pulled away from. We clinked glasses while Marcus banged his sippy cup on his tray, adding percussion to our moment of reconciliation. Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the kind of dramatic beauty that makes you believe in second chances and new chapters. Later, as I helped my mother clear the dishes, she paused in the doorway between the kitchen and dining room. "Rebecca," she said, "I want you to know that we never stopped loving you, we just forgot how to show it." "I know, Mom. And I never stopped fighting for families like ours. I just forgot to fight for my own." The kitchen light cast everything in warm yellow tones as we worked side by side, washing dishes and putting away leftovers, doing the ordinary things that extraordinary people do when they remember what matters most. Tomorrow I would return to my duties, continue serving my country, and begin preparing for my new role as an educator and mentor. But tonight I was simply Rebecca Martinez, daughter, sister, aunt, standing in the kitchen where I had learned to cook, surrounded by the people who had shaped me long before the Army ever knew my name. The war for my family was over. We had all won. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.